Okay, so today we're not going to do the midterm exam review. We're going to continue on with chapter 3 and probably spend a lot of time focusing on preparing that form 941. I know a lot of the questions that I got, well, I got a lot of questions, an awful lot of questions via email. Several of them were concerning the filling out of the 941. So we will spend some time on that today and then finish up chapter 3 on Thursday. Then we will do some review for the midterm. I think before I say, there is so the midterm review folder is here. This is just an example from another screenshot from another semester, prior semester, just to kind of help you out. These are the things though that you'll want to focus on. Remember, for the midterm, which will be next Tuesday, in class, during class, so you'll have the full class period to finish it. You can use 1 page front and back of notes. They can be handwritten or they can be printed or typed and printed. That's fine, just as long as you have created them. Okay, I don't photocopy stuff. The point behind the notes is it kind of forces you to review all of that stuff. It also helps assist in some of those calculation problems and things of that nature. But we will go through on Thursday in a little bit more detail of the things that you'll want to prepare for to kind of put that sheet together. Now, I will tell you, you might want to. I'm going to let you keep the sheet that you prepare, and you might want to keep it because for the final exam and for the assessment exam, you also get to use a sheet of notes. So obviously for the final and the assessment, it's going to contain more information since we're going to go through those final 3 chapters. So you're going to want to add information, but you may want to extract some of that information that you had on that sheet. It just might be a good handy thing for you to use for review as well. So it will be, you also get 1 sheet of scratch paper, and you can use the calculator, either a simple calculator or the calculator on your computer. You should have a calculator. You can just go in the search bar and type in calculator and one will be pulled up, but no cell phones. So I will ask you when you're taking the exam, I will ask you to put everything that you're not allowed to have under the desk or put it away somehow, okay? That would include cell phones. Any questions about that so far? And again, you'll be able to ask more questions on Thursday. No? All right, cool. So let's finish up chapter 3, shall we? And I know there are I'm hoping that we have some time as well to go over some of those homework problems that you may still have. I know there were, I got a lot of the same questions, so I would suspect that many of you have, even if you didn't ask me and reach out for information about those particular questions, I would suspect that several of you probably have the same questions. So let's get into open these up. We started to sort of look at the 941. I know couple of the biggest issues that students seem to have with this 941 was, first off, that line 7 with the adjustment for fractions of cents. I know I had a lot of questions about that, so we'll go through. Actually, I have one of your homework problems I'm gonna go through with you, so you'll probably want to pay attention to that. And then also the monthly scheduled depositor information in part 2, where you had to list what the liability was for each of those months. I got a lot of questions about that also. We also want to take a look at the Schedule B. Just make sure, see here. Yeah, this example doesn't have a Schedule B on it, but I'll go through the Schedule B also. Okay. Okay, so just to recap, that first section, again, we're going to just put in the identifying information. The employer ID number is going to go right up at the top. Again, that employer ID number is used to identify that employer on all documents that are submitted to the IRS. Including, so end of year W-2 forms, the employer always submits a copy of those to the IRS. Those have the EIN on them. These 941 forms, they've got the EIN listed on there. So that EIN is incredibly important, and it identifies that particular employer for all of these employment form purposes, as well as for income tax purposes. So if the employer has to file an income tax form, a separate income tax return, that EIN would identify, the same EIN would identify them. Then again, we're gonna list or check which quarter this pertains to. So, number of employees who received wages. Again, there are specific dates listed on there that they wanna know how many employees did you pay during the pay period that included that date. Even if the employee was only there for 1 day, if they were paid during a pay period that included that date, you would include them in the count on line 1. Line 2, total wages, tips, and other types of compensation. So that would be all of those wages that are subject to income taxes. A little bit different from the wages that might be subject to Social Security taxes, which we list down here. Federal income taxes withheld, that's on line 3, so that, you would have totaled for the entire quarter how much was withheld from employee paychecks, and that's what is entered on line 3. This section, so line 4, again, if none of the compensation was subject to Social Security or Medicare tax, you would check this box. That means you're not going to have anything listed in this section. Okay. This section only pertains to Social Security and Medicare taxes and those wages that are subject to those taxes. So the first line, taxable Social Security wages. Now, think for a second. This amount here, even though in this example it's the same as on line 2, it isn't necessarily going to always be the same number. Why might that be? I think we talked about this a little bit last week. Why might that number of taxable Social Security wages, and this pertains to the wages, be different from the total wages?
Yeah, there's a separate line for tips.
I'm sorry, there is a separate line for tips, yes, so that could be one of the reasons as well, those taxable Social Security tips. If you added those two together, it might equal that line 2, but even adding those two together might not equal line 2. Yeah,
Is that the fraction of cents?
no, that's gonna be down below. That would be down below, so that's not, we're just talking about the total wages though. That fraction of cents comes in, that difference comes in after we've calculated the tax for each of those, yeah. But we're just talking about the wages right now. So think about the wages and why those Social Security wages, even if you included the tips, might be different from total wages. Think about that for a sec. So we have some wages that wouldn't be subject to Social Security taxes, right? We might have some wages that wouldn't be subject to Social Security taxes. When might that happen?
$142,800.
Exactly. So if we have employees who have, during this quarter, have reached that wage base, that Social Security wage base of $142,800, those wages would not be included down here because they're not subject to Social Security tax, right? There might be a difference. Now there are other reasons why there might be a difference. Pensions. If the employee and we haven't quite got to this point yet, but if the employee contributes any amount of their salary to like a 401k or some other type of pension plan, that income, or that, I'm sorry, that diversion of income into their retirement plan reduces the amount of taxes or the amount of wages that are subject to federal income tax, but it doesn't reduce the amount of wages that are subject to Social Security tax. That may be another reason why there's a difference. There are other types of benefits as well. Certain types of, not garnishments, but payroll deductions that might also create a difference between those. So in this example, they're the same. That makes life easy. But in real life, oftentimes you will find that these numbers are different. Okay? Addison pointed out another frequent question that I got on the homework. She mentioned these Social Security tips. So if we have employees who received tipped income during the period, that tipped income is not going to be included in wages. They're tips. They're not wages. So for Social Security purposes, those tips would be listed separately here. Now they're taxed at the same rate, right? This is still the 12.4%, but the form has that particular line separated. Now, for some reason, and don't ask me why, I can't tell you off the top of my head, Medicare wages and tips are bunched together, right? So you might have, like, so for taxable Social Security wages, let's look, so line 5A, we'll say 100,000, and then nothing on those two lines, and 5, is that 5A? Those are all 5As. 5B, we have 20,000 in tips, so this is wages, this is tips. That means that most likely, maybe not, if we have anybody who exceeded the wage base, but this taxable Medicare wages and tips is going to include both of those amounts. So for the sake of argument, let's say in our example here, nobody exceeded that wage base. So our Medicare wages are the same as our Social Security wages. On line 5C, so this is Social Security tips, Social Security wages. This is Medicare wages and tips. This would be 120,000. So this 20,000 separated in the case of Social Security. Then we've got taxable wages and tips subject to additional Medicare tax withholding. What wages would those be?
Over 200,000.
Right, so if we had some employees, one or more employees, who had reached that $200,000 benchmark during this quarter, then those employees would start to be subject to that additional Medicare tax withholding, right? So column 1 for all of these is refers to the wages, just the wages that are subject to those taxes. Column 2 are the actual taxes that are going to be totaled up. You'll see on the following lines. Are there questions about this section? Okay, I know you've got a couple of problems in your homework where these are separated out. They gave you information about tips. And so, you know, I had a lot of students email me, I think they were mostly in the online class, wondering why they weren't, like, they didn't enter anything in here and wondering why that was a red X, because they had forgotten to actually enter. There were Social Security tips on the particular 941 in that problem. Questions? All right. So, and this is a little bit hard to see. I wish they hadn't divided this up into different screens, but for different slides, but they did. All right. So the next line, second half of this, the first page of the 941, total Social Security and Medicare taxes. So in this line, 5E, all we're totaling up is the amounts, in column 2 of lines 5A through D. Okay, just taking the total amount of the taxes, not the wages, but of the taxes, and entering that then into, or onto line 5E. We don't have anything on line 5F. That's getting a little bit advanced for an introductory payroll class. You'll see there are several of these lines that we don't really talk about because they are a little more advanced subjects. Line 6, we are now going to add up the total Social Security and Medicare taxes that are due and the federal income taxes that have been withheld. So this line here is for a total of all of those taxes. Now the next one is what trips a lot of students up, this fractions of cents. In order to figure out what this is, we first have to figure out what we deposited. Right? So it's not really in order on this sheet of how you need to prepare the form. You would have also, where is it here, already filled out this information or the Schedule B. This pertains to the deposits. How much was deposited during the quarter? The amount of deposits have to match the amount that's due. If they don't, that means you owe some money. However, there's certain times when we have a difference that's just due to rounding. So I don't know if I can put together an example. Let's kind of, so I can kind of show you how this works. Let's say we've got 3 employees. Employee 1, employee 2, employee 3. And they were paid wages during the quarter of, let's say, $4,921.71, $5,222.02. I don't know if this is going to work out because I'm just making these numbers off the top of my head. And then employee 3 was paid $1,920.03. And these were all subject to Social Security and Medicare taxes. Okay? Now, if we take these on an individual basis, we multiply this by, I'm gonna use the whole 15.3% for all of it. 15.3%. We're gonna do the same here and do the same here. My calculator. So 4921.71 times 0.153. So total Social Security and Medicare taxes, both the employer and the employee portion. So $753.02. And 523.02. 0.153. 798.97. Okay. We have to round this. 3, 6, 293.76. Okay, so this is the amount we would have deposited during the quarters. Whoops. So 753.02 plus 798.97 plus 293.76, 1845.75. But when we're filling out the form, we're not taking individual employees and calculating all that out. We're summing all of the wages together. Right? So 4921.71 plus 5222.02 plus 220.03, 1206.376. And we're gonna multiply this by 0.153. Hopefully we're gonna get something different. Yep, we do. So 1845.76. These are our deposits. This is our tax due. We have a penny difference, right? Because of this difference between multiplying the wages for individual employees and multiplying the total wages for all employees. This is just a rounding difference, 76 and 75. So we're gonna have to make an adjustment of 1 cent. And what we're actually gonna do, when we calculate this out, we'll say there wasn't any federal income tax withholding. So the total Social Security and Medicare taxes would have been, did I do that right? 153, 1845.76 would go on line 5E and line 6 if we don't have any federal income taxes withheld. But in this line 7, we're gonna have to subtract 1 cent to get this to 1845.75. Questions about that? That's all it, when I say it's because of rounding differences. It just has to do with the difference between calculating those on an individual employee basis. And remember, they also probably would have been calculated on not only an individual employee basis, but an individual payday basis, right? So you're gonna come up, a lot of times you'll get this slight difference. Now, if it's a large number, if it's more than probably about 15 cents. 15 cents is kind of a high number for a rounding difference, but it's possible. But if you get to a difference of probably more than about 50 cents, there was probably some sort of error, maybe in your deposits or in your calculation in the section above. Okay, you kind of get to a point where, yeah, that's not really a rounding difference, that's a mistake somewhere. But that's what that line 7 is designed to address, is that rounding difference. Questions? Now, sometimes this number is going to be positive, sometimes it's going to be negative. Okay, if it so happens that the deposits that you made were slightly higher than the amount of tax that's actually due to rounding, then that is going to be a positive number. If it so happens that the amount of deposits that you made are slightly less than the amount of tax that's due, then you're going to round it. You're actually going to have a negative number, because you're getting it to equal the deposits. You're getting the tax due to equal the deposits, but only if it's due to rounding. No questions. Really? Really, really? All right. We will continue on. Line 10 is the sum of those numbers. So this would be, in my example here, this is line 7. I'm sorry. This is line 7. This is line 10. This would have been line 6 here. All right, so line 10, and again, we're not going to worry about sick pay adjustments or group term life insurance for this class. They are used as lines, they're not ignored, but they, for our purposes, we're gonna skip over those. So line 10 then is our total tax after adjustments. We're not gonna use line 11A either, or 11B, or 11C. These are different types of payroll tax credits that that the employer may have been eligible for. Line 11D also. Total taxes after adjustments and non-refundable credits. This line 12 is gonna be the same as line 10. Total deposits, so obviously here's our deposits. That should equal this. So our total deposits and refundable credits are going to equal the same amount here. So this is going to be 13E. Those all should be the same. And line 13G as well. Now again, if that difference wasn't due to rounding, then there may be some tax due, or there may be a refund due. That would be indicated on either line 14 or line 15. So you can see, if you think about, if you have any familiarity with the Form 1040 that individuals fill out every year, it is sort of the same concept. You're doing the calculation to figure out how much tax is due, and then you are entering how much tax has been paid, and then you're reconciling between the two. Now we don't have a rounding on the Form 1040. We don't have a place for rounding differences, right? But if it's less than 50 cents, you round down to 0. If it's 50 cents or more, you round up to 1 on those individual tax returns. But same concept. All right. Part 2 pertains to deposits that were made. Right? Tell us about your deposit schedule and tax liability for this quarter. So this first one, and by the way, all of these forms, really all you have to do is read the lines. They will tell you exactly what they're looking for. You may have to read them slowly because the language can be a little bit complex at times, but the information is right there on the form. So line 12 on this, if line 12 on this return is less than 2,500, okay, so line 12, this would have been what our taxes due, right? If it's less than 2,500, or line 12 on the return from the previous quarter is less than 2,500. So they're giving you an opportunity. So maybe this was over 2,500 this time, but last time it was under 2,500. Well, your deposit schedule wouldn't have changed. You still would have been a quarterly depositor. You didn't know during this quarter until you got to the end of the quarter that that amount was going to be over 2,500. So that's why they're saying, we'll look at last quarter to see where you stood. And then we'll look at this quarter as well. So if either one of those is less than 2,500 and you did not incur a $100,000 next day liability, deposit obligation, so remember, if we had one pay period, even if this is what we normally incur, if we had one pay period where that liability was over $100,000, we would have had, now we can't check this box. This is just for quarterly payments up here. So if you meet the requirements for quarterly payments, you check this box and you can include the payment with this return. And there's a payment voucher that would go with it, or you can make that payment through the EFTPS system, that electronic funds transfer. If you were a monthly scheduled depositor for the entire quarter, then you're going to fill out this section and indicate what your liability was. What your liability was for these 3 months. Okay. What they're going to do is the IRS knows what the deposits were, So they're gonna match up what the liability is with what the deposits were. And if there was any difference, as you can tell from some of your problems as well, there are penalties that may be involved, right? If, however, you were not a monthly scheduled depositor, then you would check this box. So this means you were a semi-weekly scheduled depositor, or you had some liability where a pay period where it was $100,000 or more. And this is where the Schedule B comes in. We'll look at the Schedule B. I don't think they have a Schedule B in these examples, so I'm gonna pull one up so we can look at that Schedule B. This means you're a semi-weekly scheduled depositor, and you're gonna have to fill out a Schedule B. It's the same, sort of the same, but more complex, more complex than this, but it's the same concept. The IRS knows when you made deposits. They want to know when your liability was to see if you should have incurred any penalties during that period. Okay, so quarterly would be checked up here, monthly would be checked here, semi-weekly or next day would be checked here. And then you'd have to fill out that Schedule B. Questions about this? I know you've got one problem, at least one problem in your homework that caused some heartburn for a few students about how to fill this out, because it was a problem that was not, like there were 5 pays in month 1, there were 4 pays in month 2, there were 4 pays in month 3. So you had to figure out, based on the information they gave you and based on that information about how many pays, obviously there were on a weekly pay cycle, these 3 amounts weren't equal to each other. Month 1 would have been higher because it had more pays, right? More pays means higher liability, higher tax liability. Let's see here. All right, so this last part here, I don't think you had any where you had to fill any of this stuff out. So if the business closed or you stopped paying wages, you would click here. That tells the IRS, don't expect to get another 941 from us, right? If it is the last one and this box isn't checked, they're gonna be expecting to get another 941 at some point in the future, and they will contact you if they don't get one. Enter the final date that you paid wages and attach a statement to your return. So if business closed down, or we sold the business and the new owners renamed it, whatever. Some sort of explanation for that. And then this last part is just the signature part. So if the employer wants somebody else to be able to speak to the IRS on their behalf, because they don't know the first thing about payroll taxes, and if the IRS came asking, they just refer them to the payroll preparer anyway. You can click yes. You can talk to somebody else. If not, you would check no. This is the all of these forms have to be signed by somebody in authority at the company. Okay, so this is where that spot is now. In this case, it was the owner. Wouldn't always be the owner. It might be the payroll manager. Be the president, the vice president, just depends on the company, right? This section is just for paid preparer use. So if they paid, if the company paid somebody else to prepare the return, this information would be filled out by the paid preparer and then signed as well by the paid preparer. In order to fill out one of these forms for pay, you have to have what's called a PTIN, Preparer Tax ID Number. IRS has ID numbers for everything, okay? So this is a number that preparers apply for. It's not a terribly long process. I think there is I don't know if there's a background check involved in it anymore or not. But you do have to apply for that in order to get paid. Now, there's no requirement that you be a CPA or an enrolled agent or have any particular special certification to do that, but you do have to have a preparer tax ID number, and that is obtained through the IRS. Okay. Questions? All right, so this stuff is all the stuff that we already just went through, as is this. And skip over all of that. Now, these 941 forms are also used to reconcile the W-2 forms that are issued at the end of the year. So if you recall, the W-2 forms are those forms that are given to individual employees that summarize all of their income and withholdings throughout the year. They're given to employees at the end of the year, well, actually at the beginning of the following year, so that they can prepare their tax returns, their individual tax returns. The sum of all of those W-2s has to match all 4 quarters of the 941s. So for example, we've got here wages, tips, and other compensation. 74,895.92. This was just for 1 quarter. All 4 quarters of this line 2 summed up would have to equal the total amount of wages that were subject to federal income tax on all of the W-2s that were prepared during the year. They have to match. If they don't match, there's a problem. Even if by 1 cent, there's no rounding. There's no rounding freebie on that. So all 4 quarters, you would add up all 4 quarters of these 941s, and they would match the total of everything in box 1 of the W-2s. I'm gonna pull up a W-2, and I think we've looked at W-2s, but W-2, so you can see what I'm talking about here, and W-3. Form W-3. Okay. So this is what the W-2 looks like. I think we've gone through this, but this is what's issued to individual employees at the end of the year. Like I said, at the beginning of the following year. It summarizes all of the wages that they've been paid, how much of those wages were subject to Social Security tax, how much of those wages were subject to Medicare tax, how much of those wages were actually tips rather than wages, and then the corresponding taxes that were withheld on those wages. Also at the bottom here, information about the state information, employer's tax state ID number, state wages, so wages that were subject to income tax at the state level, and then the amount of state income taxes that were withheld. Each individual employee gets one of those, and that's what they use then to prepare their Form 1040 at the end of the year. This is a Form W-3. This doesn't go to the employees. This is a summary of all of the W-2s that were issued. Okay, so this would, all of the wages that were listed on all of the W-2s would be summed up and listed here on box 1 of this W-3. Same thing for the Social Security wages, Medicare wages. You can see it's very similar to the W-2, but this is for all of the employees. So we've got 3 employees over here. They would each get an individual W-2 form that would summarize all of those wages and amounts withheld. And then we would also fill out a W-3 that lists all of the information for every employee during the year. This amount here, well, the wages, tips, and other compensation, Social Security wages, and the amounts withheld have to match the sum of all of the amounts on the Form 941, the sum of all 4 quarters. So it's another reconciliation that has to be done. It's done at the end of the year. to ensure that all of that was prepared accurately. Okay? All of the amounts withheld have to match. So you see we've got our federal income tax withheld, 12,372.13. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say we had all four quarters were exactly the same. So 74,895.92, whoops, 2 times 4, 299,583.68. On this this isn't fillable, but in this box it would be the 299,583.68 for all of the wages. Federal income tax withheld, if it was exactly the same for each of the four quarters, we would multiply the 12,372.13 times 4 quarters, 49,488.52. That's the amount that should be on this line 2. Now you're not taking the information from the 941 to fill out the W3. That information is actually being extracted from the sum of all of the W2 forms. It's just that they have to match. Okay, they have to be equal. And again, that's done at the end. That's done in January. These forms are all due by January 31st. W2s are due to employees by January 31st. 941s are due to the IRS by January 31st. I think the W3s, they actually give you a little extra time to do those, but normally businesses will do those at the same time that they prepare the W2s. But you got a month to make sure all of that matches. Questions? Okay. So, we talked about a lot of this stuff. There are some electronic filing options that are available. Again, you have to apply for a PIN number, and you've got to apply for the privilege of filing the 941s electronically with the IRS. Last I knew anyway, a lot of companies, at least small companies, would still do it on paper. You just fill it out and mail it. There is a Form 941X that is used for amended 941s. So if you made a mistake on a 941, and believe me, mistakes on 941s are nightmares to correct. They are, because you've got, especially if it was for a previous year, because if you've got a mistake on the 941, chances are you also have mistakes on the W2s if you had already issued them. So let's just say you find out you made a mistake in January of 2020 on a 941. You've got to correct that, and then you've already issued all of your W2s for 2020. It could be that mistake on the 941 affects the amounts that are on the W2s as well. So you'd have to go back and reissue all of the W2s for employees that have already filed their taxes, send them out new corrected W2s, and then they would, depending upon the amount of the difference, may or may not have to file amended tax returns. So it just creates this whole cascade effect of changes that would then have to be made. Just kind of emphasizing the importance of that accuracy and that attention to detail that is required in order to prepare these. Okay, now mistakes do happen, honest mistakes do happen, so it's hard to fully prevent those, but having policies and procedures in place to check, double check, triple check that information is advisable. Penalties. So there are lots of penalties. The IRS loves their penalties. They issue penalty, and oftentimes employers who are in violation of one or who are subject to one penalty will be subject to more than one penalty. So if you don't file the employment tax returns, so you didn't file the 941 on time, even if it was one day late, right? Instead of mailing it by the 31st, you mailed it by the 1st of the following month, and it wasn't a weekend or holiday issue. So if it was late, there's a penalty for that. Now usually they give you one freebie, one chance, right? If you have cause for other late filings or other late payments. Let's just say it's a mom and pop operation and there was a tornado ripped through and you just couldn't get them filed in time or couldn't get the payments made in time. That would probably be just cause for being late, and they'd probably abate those penalties. But you have to talk to the IRS about that kind of stuff. So, not filing that 941 or the W-2s or the W-3, any of those employment tax returns. Not paying the full taxes when due. Okay, I owe $100, but I'm sending a payment for $80. Why? I don't know, but there's a penalty then for not paying the full taxes. Not making timely deposits. We're on a deposit schedule, remember. If we are late, even by a day, that means our deposit is not timely. There's a penalty for that. Not furnishing payee statements to employees or contractors on a timely basis. W-2s and 1099s. You don't issue them to those W-2s to employees by the 31st of January, but you send them out on the 5th of February, and somebody turns you in, there would be a penalty for that, for not furnishing that. Same with the 1099 forms, if those are not submitted on time. Not filing information returns with the IRS on time. So those would be any type of information returns. That would include the 1099s have a reconciliation form as well called a 1096, just like the W-2 has the W-3. So that would be included in that. Not supplying identification numbers. So if you issue a bunch of W-2s and you don't have social security numbers on any of them, that's a problem. Okay, so just the different types of penalties. Now there's also interest. So the IRS, if you owe them money, if you were late in paying taxes that were due, they'll start to charge you interest on that as well. Okay? And those interest rates would be going up. It used to be quite low, but they'd be starting to go up. All right, we're not gonna do this. Okay, so we finished up the chapter. We'll go through this 941 example as well. So we learned in this, we talked about who is covered under Social Security, or who is subject to Social Security tax, what types of wages are subject to Social Security tax, what is considered wages for Social Security and Medicare tax purposes. So we defined what types of compensation were considered to be wages for these purposes. Now, when we get to Chapter 4, you'll see that wages may be slightly different for income tax purposes than they are for Social Security and Medicare tax purposes. Now, most times they're the same, but sometimes they're not. Like for income tax purposes, we don't have that wage base like Social Security does, right? There's no upper limit to how much you can earn and have it be subject to income taxes. So that would be one example. We looked at the tax rates for both FICA taxes and SECA taxes and how those are applied. We talked about the requirements for depositing those payroll taxes. And when I talk about payroll taxes, it's essentially that's amounts that are collected and attached to payroll. So that would include income taxes, Social Security taxes, and Medicare taxes. Okay. When we deposit those, again, we've got those different deposit cycles. Could be quarterly. It's going to be dependent upon how much we owe. Could be quarterly, could be monthly, could be semi-weekly, could be next day. And then also the 941, we talked about the schedule for the 941 and just went through how we fill out that form. Lots of information in this chapter. A lot of stuff. So before we go through this example, are there any questions? And if you have particular homework problems that you want to take a look at, this would probably be a good opportunity to do that as well. I know they're not, your homework isn't due until next Tuesday, but I hope you get started on it before that because your midterm is also next Tuesday. Give yourself some breathing room and some time to study for the midterm also. No? Okay, I'm gonna